there's some constructive things that we can do about this. Right now on the House of Representatives, there's a bill called H.R. 1207, the Audit the FED bill for short. Is anybody familiar with that out here? Most of you probably are, because I suspect this is a politically active crowd. And for those of you who are not, it's sponsored by Congressman Ron Paul. He's made this same bill. He's proposed the same legislation a number of times over the years, and most of the time it doesn't get anywhere. The last I heard, a few days ago, there were 245 sponsors out of 235 representatives. We got over half of the House of Representatives has co-signed this bill. So the opportunities to win are there, but there's a little roadblock called Barney Frank. Doesn't want it to happen. There's a bigger roadblock called President Obama, who's proposed legislation which would gut this, giving Ben Bernanke even more power. Think about this. This is the same Ben Bernanke who, with Hank Paulson, went to Ken Lewis, the former CEO, or is he former? Is he still? Did they kick him out?
Yeah, former.
Former CEO of Bank of America. Thank you for that correction. Former CEO of Bank of America and said, hey, you got to go ahead with this transaction buying Merrill Lynch. You got to go ahead and overpay for them, because if you don't, we're going to destroy you. This, again, if what Lewis says about what Bernanke and Paulson told him, both of them belong in jail. They held a gun to this guy's head. Now, he should have had the courage to deny them, to turn down that transaction, and either paid nothing or paid something closer to what Merrill Lynch was really worth. But, he upset the financial appetite of Bank of America in doing this, and two of the culprits are the insiders. Two of the culprits behind this are the insiders that helped to create this mess in the first place. Ben Bernanke needs to go. The Federal Reserve needs to go. And in fact, there's a number of people, including Mr. Bernanke himself, who says that the Fed cannot even survive an audit. If we open the books, they're done for. And to that I can say, yay! I think that's a wonderful thing. So, what will happen if we end the Federal Reserve? Anybody think of anything bad that will happen if we get rid of the Federal Reserve? Well, here's my list. Shrink the government, make the economy less political, leave more wealth in the hands of the people, allow a more competitive and productive economy, yield more freedom, more wealth, and more happiness. I know we're in a deep hole, folks, but I think if we get the yoke of government and the yoke of the Federal Reserve off of our backs, we can recreate the wealth of this country in a relatively short order. But if we destroy our freedom, destroy economic opportunity, it could be 1,000 years before the world sees another country as great and as prosperous as the one that we live in now, or used to be. Is great. I think I'm just about on schedule here. This is great. I'm just going to recap a little bit here. Bailouts, stimulus, government interference. It's used politically. And if that's not obvious with what happened at GM and Chrysler, the force of our government came down on behalf of those union workers who were part of the problem. I won't blame all of the problems of those big three automakers on the unions, but they certainly were a part of the problem. And the power of the union was enforced by the power of the government, and essentially the government held a gun to the heads of the big three and made them sign contracts that ultimately helped to destroy those companies, or at least two of the three companies. And that list of GM dealers that was closed, according to Michelle Bachmann, there was only one person he gave $200 to a Democrat. Everybody else was a Republican donor. And I'm not a diehard Republican, so don't get me wrong on that. I think if you take a look at what George Bush did, his undermining of the Constitution, his irresponsible spending, his basically the government grew faster under George Bush, even discounting for Homeland Security and national defense. You take those two items out, it still grew faster than under all but maybe LBJ. Near record rate of growth for his entire administration. But even the money we're throwing out there, it's pretty obvious to me GM won't be saved. I don't think we're done. You know, when we give them the last of the $70 billion that Obama has pledged, and where does he get that authority from to say that he's going to give our tax dollars to them? We're not done. I'd be surprised if it was less than another $70 billion on top of the 70 he's promised them. And then I also wouldn't be surprised if either by fiat, by government, by the presidential executive power, which really doesn't exist or shouldn't exist, that he would favor the government-sponsored enterprises, government orders, and disadvantage Ford and the foreign automakers. So we're seeing our wealth is being dissipated. We're seeing a breakdown of the rule of law. Bonds will be harder to sell. This is not insignificant. Those bondholders were kicked to the back of the bus, proverbially. They had a preferred position. They took a lower interest rate in return for the guarantee that if anything happened to the companies, they would be the first ones paid. And it's not just, it's not just the fat cats. There's a lot of grandmas who are dependent $200-300 a month for their little piece of that pie.
What about all the retirement investment funds?
Pardon?
What about the retirement investment funds?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm referring to. That's an excellent point. But that's exactly what I'm referring to. There's investment retirement funds, and it's not all just fat cats. It's middle-class people who depended on the proceeds of those bonds. So now what person in the bond market is going to trust U.S. bonds anymore, U.S. industrial bonds? Obama has said the rule of law doesn't apply. It's just going to make it harder for companies to raise capital. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I'm just, kind of underlining that was also backed up by the federal court system. His position on it, on the takeover, and then the position that they used for the bondholders, that was backed up by the federal courts.
You're absolutely right. But where in the Constitution is it written that the government has that authority? Show it to me. It's not there. The rule of law doesn't apply. It's a very dangerous time to live in. Everything that the government has done is going to lead to a longer and deeper recession, more unemployment, and the Federal Reserve is the linchpin that holds it all together. Because the government can't raise it through taxes. They print it. So, effects of the boom-bust economy, the falling dollar, concentration of wealth in the hands of the super rich, the poor and the middle class at a greater advantage, greater increase in the size and strength of government. Those are all the effects of the Federal Reserve. Or I should say maybe some of them. Anyway, it should be obvious. To me, freedom is very important. I meant to tip that off at the front of the class. Like I said, a point of view. But it is possible to change your point of view because 35 years ago I was a progressive Democrat, but my experiences in and with government and as a businessman kind of beat that out of me. But there's, for those of you who are religious, yes, your God is first and your family is second and all of that, and that's fine. But on God's green earth, there is nothing more important outside of those than our liberty. Because again, if we have our freedom, we can rebuild what has been lost. We can gain it back, or at least have the opportunity to. And in closing, I'm going to quote Judge Blackstone, a very famous man, and he said, "Liberty dwells in the hearts and minds of men and women. Once it dies there, no law, no court, no constitution can save it."